Hi cuties, and welcome to another mini review. This is a mini review of an arc that I got, and it comes out on almost said January 14th, very soon. And this is the In Between Bookstore by Edward Underhill. The overall synopsis of this story is we have a trans man character named Darby who is living in New York, but things are not going well for Darby, so he ends up moving back home to like Oak Falls, I think is the place called, to help his mom move out of her house into a condo, all the while he is experiencing a weird not time loop, but a time travel situation every time he goes to visit the little bookstore that he used to work at as a teenager pre-transition. He sees himself pre-transition, and it's a wild time. Overall, this story is one about self-love and growing, understanding how you affect the world around you by your choices and the things that you say and do. It's kind of an unlearning selfishness sort of story, I would say. And I enjoyed it for the most part. We have Darby starting out in New York, living in a very relatable life. So Darby is about to turn 30. So crisis. And Darby is losing his job. Can't afford the rent, lives in a tiny place in New York, that's very expensive, because New York, very expensive place to live. And he has this support group of friends, and what is on my ceiling? He proposes moving back home, because he doesn't have anything here. There's nothing going for him. And this definitely upsets his friends. So he kind of leaves on bad terms to move back in with his mom as he finds out that she is selling the house and moving into a condo. And so he goes back to his home and runs into his old best friend, and they had a big falling out. So this best friend's name is Michael, and surprise, Michael's actually gay. Didn't know that about him. And it's a very awkward meeting, and a lot of the story revolves around what happened that drove them apart. And as they reconnect, Darby asks, dude, what happened? Why did you suddenly, shut me out? And Michael is pretty furious about this and doesn't answer the question. And that's one of the main faults I find in this story, is a lot of this could have been solved with communication. And that is one of the overall themes in the story is, hey, talk about what's going on. Now, granted, the thing that happened to them as kids, as teenagers don't want to talk about their feelings. They don't want to talk about what they're going through. The world is a nightmare. The world is ending in every teenager's dramatic life. I know this. I was a teenager once. So that was accurate. So all the while, we have Darby going into the In-Between Bookstore, or In Between Books, and communicating back in is it the 90s or the 2000s? I think it's probably early 2000s. Darby's young. And is talking with his pre-transition self, trying to figure out what's going on, trying to parse the mystery, because at the timeline he's seeing, he's still best friends with Michael. But something is off, he's trying to figure out what's going on. So the whole story is wrapped around this narrative, and everything seems to be going good. We figure out what has happened and why things went the way they went. There is a sort of reunion or a rekindling of friendship and a little bit more between Darby and Michael, and then we get to the final climax. Now, I don't want to spoil it for you, but for me, this is what ruined the book. It's not a bad book, but this ending ruined it for me. I did not like how this ended up. It's kind of a bittersweet ending, and if you know me, I don't like a bittersweet ending. And I just think that it felt almost like Darby didn't learn his lesson. He learned a bit, I guess, but for things to end up the way they did after discovering and kind of fixing the problem of the past, I was kind of upset by that. And I felt like that shouldn't have been how it went. That shouldn't be how things go. It's realistic on one hand, but it's also unrealistic on another. So it's very much up to the reader to decide, was this a good ending? or not. In my opinion, I didn't like that ending. Other people might disagree. Overall, I thought the writing was very good, and I was thoroughly invested in this story, in this town, learning about all these things, you know, what happens when you leave and come back. It's a storyline that I can relate to quite a bit as someone who has not only left the state and come home, but also left the country and come home and found things very different than I had left them. And so the overall Darby's story is very relatable. I just disagree with some things, some choices that were made. And yes, a lot of it could have been solved very early on. Like, Michael and Darby are both adults now. You could have had this conversation instead of just like every chance you got storming off and not saying anything. That part kind of annoyed me a little bit in this. I still ended up giving the story an overall 4.5 because I thought it had a really important message. It was, again, very relatable and well written. I'm taking away the half star because I disagree with that ending. But overall, I would say definitely give this one a read. If any of that sounds interesting to you, I think his mom is really funny. She's a very accepting mother, so luckily we didn't have any kind of horrible like transphobia or anything in this book. It's a lot of internalized things and a lot of great moments of what would you tell your younger self if you could without disrupting the space-time continuum, you know? So it had a lot of really, really great moments like that. So if that sounds interesting to you, I would check this one out. Okay, I'm gonna go now. Bye.